All right. What's the name of the podcast again? I'm seriously blanking. Welcome to Unqualified Opinion, the podcast where the audience is probably more well-informed than the hosts. How's it going, Scott?
It is going well, Steve. How are you doing?
Pretty good. Pretty good. I went to the store to get our obligatory booze for the podcast, and I found this really fancy $16 4-pack, and I can't even pronounce it. It's from the brewery, spelled Bruery. It's called Orxata, Orxata, and it says it's a blonde ale brewed with rice and lactose, with natural cinnamon and vanilla flavors added. So the whole lactose intolerance thing, it's like a big no to that. It's a giant FU. We're going to actually just add more of it in. 7.2% by volume, and I have 4 of them in front of me, 1 pint, and we'll see how far I go. So I'm going to just crack this open. Let's see how it tastes.
The new dietary trend. Lactose beer.
Huh. That is a lot sweeter than I thought.
Lactose is sugar.
I
think.
So, it tastes like a child tried to make a holiday drink for adults. It's a lot of cinnamon and sugar in a blonde ale, which, if it was a porter, it kind of makes sense, right? Because it's a darker ale. But since it's a blonde ale, it's just the cinnamon and the sugariness is just so cutting. It just doesn't taste like a beer anymore. I mean, I think I would actually enjoy this if I didn't come into it thinking it was a beer. But now that I did, I'm just really off put by it. Anyway, we don't know which episode of the podcast is this. For all we know, it might be the very first one. So for anyone who doesn't know, we start the podcast by grabbing a new drink and talking about it, and then we go on to a topic that we don't know about. So that's my drink. Scott, what are you drinking today?
Yeah, I'm having a glass of red wine, and don't ask me what type because it doesn't say. It is just wine in a bottle, and it happens to be red. And it's drinkable. So I'm quite content.
Are you going to say any more about it, or are you just going to give the audience the fact that it's drinkable?
It was simply, I don't know what else to say about it. It's red.
It's red and it goes down.
It might have a date on it. It might have a date. 2015. That is an old wine.
Is this a wine that you bought back from 2015 and it's aged a few years, or is this a wine that you had in the back of your fridge since 2015 and you just realized you had it?
Neither. It's from the liquor store from today, so they've had it since 2015, probably because no one's bought it. As you know, cheap wines aren't supposed to age because they're cheap and they're bad, and if you age a bad thing, it doesn't get better, it just gets bad.
Oh boy!
But it really isn't bad. I'm reading it. It's called Protocolo Red Wine, product of Spain.
Wait a second.
2015.
So for anyone who doesn't know, Scott lives in Minnesota, and I could have sworn that Minnesota had a law that you couldn't buy alcohol on Sundays. What happened to that?
Steve! Oh, so Steve now lives in D.C., the uncivilized capital of our country, and since he's been gone, he's right. Minnesota used to not be able to sell liquor on a Sunday. They changed that last year, so you can now buy liquor on a Sunday until 6 p.m. Everything has to close at 6 p.m. so the good God-fearing people, the God-fearing Lutherans, can go home and have a nice meal with their nice Midwestern family around their Lutheran Christmas tree. But I was able to get out and get my bottle of red wine today. And on my walk, I'm normally I like tasteful things. The wine being excluded from that. And I don't really like lawn. I hate lawn ornaments. People who have flamingos with Santa hats, really just something needs to be done with them. But on my way to the liquor store, I saw the most tasteful lawn ornament, and I know those two words don't go together, but that I've ever seen in my life. And it was a beautiful golden retriever dog with a little puppy. And it was just so artistically done, and they had a couple tasteful white lights inside of them. They were kind of made of this kind of mesh twig mixture, and they're sort of emanating this glowing light. And they were just sitting there, these little two dogs, and one was wearing a Santa hat, and they were just staring into each other's eyes. And
you see, I was waiting for the Christmassy part of that, and I guess the Santa hat is that.
The Santa hat. And that was the only ornamentation on the entire house. No Christmas lights, no Christmas tree inside, just this little dog and its puppy made out of wire and string with a Santa hat. I mean, it was just so cute. I mean, it's completely ridiculous, and I would never buy one myself, but it was very tasteful as far as lawn ornaments go.
So now that we're actually hitting the holiday seasons, are you putting up any ornaments?
I have a Christmas tree, and well, the funny thing is in Minnesota, I'm not quite sure if they just grow everything extra large here for Paul Bunyan, but the Christmas tree farm, I'm looking at it right now, it is the tippy top of a tree. Because the tree farm, the trees were all about 40 feet high, and they give you a saw, and they say, go out, and if you see a top of a tree you like, cut the tree down, and then cut it in half again, and then cut it in half again, and you can drag the tip top back, and we'll bundle it up for you to take back. So
wow.
We're walking through the Christmas tree farm, and these trees are it's like an old growth forest of pine trees, and they give you this dinky little saw and say, cut it down, and then we cut it down. Of course, it's still about 30 feet high, so you have to cut it in half, and then we cut off the very tippy top and drag it back.
Wait, so you actually grabbed one of these saws and cut down one of these trees?
Yeah. It was a whole thing. Families out, babies cutting these trees down.
You're becoming a true Midwestern
safety hazard. Man. Oh yeah. There was hot cider and some lutefisk, and everyone was very cheerful, and Christmas tunes were playing, and the snow was falling, and it was just a beautiful Lutheran scene. Very quaint.
So
anyway,
moving on. Not to cut you short of your great Christmas tale, but today I've done deliberately. I'm gonna at least act like it was deliberately no research into our podcast topic, and that's because our topic today is buying a house, buying your first house, actually. And I have no experience in this, and Scott actually just recently bought his first house, and because of that, we thought it might be interesting to kind of frame this as Scott teaching me what the process is like, and for that to work best is for me to be completely ignorant, which I am, of the whole process. So before we even get started with that, do you want to tell us at least generally what the experience was like and how you feel now that you're done buying a house?
Well, I was laying on a field in downtown Minneapolis in the summer. It was in August or July of this year, and 2018, and I was sunbathing because we only get about a month of warm sun in Minneapolis per year. So I had my shirt off and tucked into a corner, drinking a cappuccino, and sitting there reading a nice novel, and it dawned on me all of a sudden that why don't I buy a house? And it just struck me like a thunderbolt. And it had always been in the back of my mind, and I thought, well, you know what? I'm single, unfortunately, and this has just always been something I want to do. And I thought, well, if I bought a house, I'm sure it'll be very attractive to females. And so I went ahead and did it. And it was a very quick process. I think a lot of people do a lot longer, more deliberative process, but I got mine within 3 months, and without too much hassle. I had a strict budget, but I found a place I wanted and moved in. Nothing too wrong with it. You know, a little leak here and there, a little slope there and up and down there, and water coming through ceilings in places. But you know, you fix it up, and it's fine. I'm sitting here dry and relatively warm.
Wait, so all right, so let's start with the beginning. The why of the whole process. How did you get to the point that you decided, I want to buy a house, and here's why it makes sense? Here, you know, list out the pros and cons of doing so, and how it made sense for you to actually decide this is the time for me to go ahead with a purchase like this.
Well, there's two parts of any big purchase, right? Be it college, be it buying a car, being it getting married, being it buying a house. There is the financial benefit, such as when you get married, you get a tax break. Now, that's why I would get married, but others may get married for love. Now, when I bought the house, I had to weigh these two factors as well, the financial and the emotional, and the kind of your pocketbook, and then your own well-being. And for me, it was hard to balance the two, because if it was a financial decision, I maybe would have bought. If it was purely financial, I would have. I don't own a car. I would have bought a car. I would have gone out into the suburbs and bought a place for about $150 that was just great. The value would have risen 100% over several years. I mean, the market's booming out there, and that would have made a lot of financial sense. But I had to balance that with a personal desire to live in the city, to be close to transit, to be close to a lot of urban amenities. And so it was a big cost benefit balance I had to do to figure out which place I wanted to buy. It was not purely economical, and I'll admit that. You know, buying a house is never going to be purely economical. It's somewhere you live, and you have to be happy there.
Okay, so let's break that down. I don't want to reveal exactly where you live, but maybe you can talk a little bit about the characteristics of the neighborhood, and what attracted you, and what amenities you were looking for, both in terms of the emotional side, like you said, where you're going to live, the experience of living there, as well as the financial investment side of it.
Mm-hmm. So I live in it is a very old neighborhood in Minneapolis, and it is a lot of small single-family homes, most around 1,000 square feet. And to put that in context, American homes are on average around 2,000 square feet. So it's small homes. They're small homes. And everything was developed in the early 1900s, and it's along streetcar lines. So old streetcars used to run through the area, and so every corner, or a lot of the main corners, have a coffee shop or a movie theater or a bar. And they're all within walking distance. And it's not loud. It's a quiet residential area. Kind of middle class, and it's middle class because the homes are so small that it's if you have a big family or have a lot of money, you probably want to get a much larger home. So it's a smaller properties, close to the city, close to the light rail. So it's about a 10-minute walk to the light rail to downtown Minneapolis where I work. And so all of those factors combine: the cost, the low cost, the fact that it's an old neighborhood. It's not going to lose value at any time. It's going to gain value slowly, not
why is that?
Fast. Why will it gain value?
Yeah.
Because it's generally a desirable area. It's within walking distance to the Mississippi River. It's within walking distance to beautiful parks and beautiful trails. It's a 10-minute walk to the Mississippi, where there are mansions along there. It has good school district. It's close to transportation. And generally, it is it's young people with young families who are attracted to this sort of housing, and because of that, and because it's been that way for 80 years, the housing is well maintained. small but well maintained. And as city living becomes more desirable, now it's never going to be the hottest place because just the size of the houses are so small, and also because it's not a center of nightlife. It's not booming with people all the time, but it is just a nice place to live. And that really is what there is to do here. It's to live and maybe go out and get a coffee, maybe go out and get a beer, but you're not going to go out to a raging party. That's for other areas and neighborhoods in Minneapolis. But it's very stable. It's very stable over time. And that attracted me. It's not a boom-bust area.
So I often hear that people look to buy property at the edge of where gentrification is starting to ramp up. So then, maybe it's not obvious and the real estate hasn't priced in the gentrification that's happening because it's on an adjacent neighborhood. So you can invest in that property and then you'll see larger property rises over time. But that's not the kind of neighborhood that you're talking about, right?
No, it's actually very, very unique in Minneapolis. I wouldn't say it's never gentrified because the original people who lived here were working class, middle class at the time. They worked the factories that were just down on the main street through the area, Hiawatha Avenue. And ever since then, it's really been a working class, we call that middle class now, group of white Lutherans living in this area. And it has never seen wild fluctuations in the racial makeup. It's almost always been predominantly white, predominantly middle earning, and predominantly people with families. It's an interesting area.
So why was that more attractive to you than, say, a gentrifying adjacent neighborhood? Because, I don't really know what I'm talking about, but it seems to me like the financial incentive would be higher if you went to a neighborhood that had a higher growth potential, right?
Right, but the places with higher growth potential also had higher prices because people realized that. And again, that comes back to the fact that it's somewhere where you want to be able to live right at that point. I actually looked at places in what we call North Minneapolis, which is actually West Minneapolis, but we call it North because we're odd.
It's Northwest.
Minnesota. Northwest Minneapolis. And
it is the most north part of Minneapolis. That's true.
Well, it's the south part of North Minneapolis. Anyway, we don't have to go into geography. And that is an area that's gentrified. And there's a new transit line going in there in a couple of years. There's new development happening. But I was there and I saw, quite a few police cars. I saw, people walking out on the sidewalks yelling at night. I'm like, you know what?
Sounds like my neighborhood.
Perhaps it does, but again, that's not where I want to live right now. And maybe if I bought and waited it out, it would be a good financial investment. Understand that would be displacing people, but I didn't want to do that. I wanted somewhere where I could move and had a bit of cachet, to be honest, because people hear that I live in my neighborhood's called Longfellow, and they say, "Oh, you live in, oh, that's nice." And what they don't know is I bought the cheapest house on the block.
Wait, let's talk about that. The whole which house on the block you should buy. Because that's another thing that I hear is that you should never buy the most expensive house on the block. Is that correct?
That's probably correct, but my strategy was it has to be under $200,000. It has to have a dry basement, and it has to be in relatively good condition. And I had a couple other key requirements when I was shopping around, and this place met them. And there weren't a lot of places that did, because in Minneapolis, as in the rest of the country, the housing market in those starter homes, which are generally those under $200,000 or adjusted depending on where you're living, it could be under $300,000 in DC. Those starter homes go fast; they go really fast.
Yeah, I can't find any.
Because partly because there's a little bit of pent up demand from this generation of people who grew up during the Great Recession, who saw and were hurt by that, who delayed their house buying, their first-time house buying. So now that the economy is picking up, you have more and more people entering the market for first-time homes. And so getting a place that is affordable, that's under 200 or under 300 if you're on the coast, is really hard unless you're going to settle for an absolute dump. And so when this place popped up, or in a sketchy neighborhood, or in a really like rough neighborhood that's going to be gentrified in maybe 5 years, 10 years. So when this place specifically popped up, it was the cheapest house on the block, yes, but it was because it's very small. It's also the smallest house on the block. It was probably also the least maintained house in the block. And I think, you want to look at the price, but you also want to look at how much can you actually improve it. And I saw this house. I thought there was a lot that I can do to improve and add value to this house. I can add, entire extensions onto the house because I have a lot of property to build onto. I could landscape, etc.
Yeah, so I definitely want to get into the home improvement stuff. But before we do that, can we talk through the process a little more? So, Scott, you're there. You decide what neighborhood you want. You've kind of decided on what you want for your first starter home. And, maybe you're looking on Zillow or something. What's next?
So, well, for me, I know some people go without a realtor. A real estate agent. But I didn't. I was working a lot. I didn't have the time. It takes a lot of time to do it by yourself and knowledge. So first-time homeowners almost always go with an agent. So I asked around. And I had a friend who had worked with someone that they liked. And so I scheduled a meeting and we met in person. And I will say, I asked for a couple recommendations, and this was the only one who agreed to meet me in person and actually talk about what my interests were. All the others were like, oh, I'll send you the link that shows you like the immediate listings and tell me which ones are interesting to you, and I'll go show them to you. And that's essentially
that great.
Well, that's essentially all that a real estate agent does until the closing date. That is do that. They show you places. They'll do more if you ask them to. They'll send you curated results, but I wasn't really that type of person. I wanted to do the research myself. But everything you see, they can see, and vice versa. Sometimes.
So what's the value there? What's the value added if we can just do that ourselves? And let's be honest, most first-time homeowners probably will be so excited about it that they'd be doing the research themselves as well.
The value is, well, for me, so personally, I don't own a car, so she drove me everywhere. And my realtor would drive me in the middle of the day. I would say, Colleen, what's her name? Can I go see this place? And she'd say, I'll be there in 30 minutes to pick you up. And there she was. We drove off, saw the place. We talked through. She knew about real estate, so she could say, oh, that's good, that's bad, etc. And then she would drop me back off at work in downtown. So that was a huge value add, and she should be paid for that. Very helpful for me. She was also a good sounding board, so I talked through my thoughts with her. What they are not is someone who's going to offer you financial advice, because that's not their job. They're not there to make sure that you're making the absolute best investment you can. They're there to guide you through the process of buying the home, to assist you to decrease the friction of the process, driving you places, etc. And I realized that because, she would always kind of hedge everything she says, like, oh, that could be a good place, but there's these things, or, oh, but there's those things, but it may be a good place because of this. So she was very.
Do they have additional knowledge about certain properties that you or I wouldn't be able to get?
Sometimes a realtor, when they're working for an agency, will know properties that are going to be listed but haven't been listed yet. So the public can't see them yet. So they can give you a peek into properties that are coming up. That's only for the properties that their agency actually sells, though. So she wouldn't be able to tell me what other agencies in other areas we're going to be selling in a couple days.
Okay.
Yeah.
And realtors usually take, what, 6% between the selling and the buying agent? Is that really worth it?
So let me get there. So the real value for me that Colleen, my agent, brought was in the actual process of submitting the bid, of completing the paperwork. The paperwork is unbelievable. You've never seen so much paperwork in your life and so much legal terms. Ooh. And if you do it by yourself, you're still encouraged to hire a lawyer to read through the terms and conditions because it's hard to understand. So that's where the value for her came for me, is guiding me through the actual legal financial process of actually purchasing a house. So that was valuable for me as well as driving me around. But yes, Steve, to your question, they traditionally will take 3%, seller and buyer, but the buyer pays all of it, and the seller pays all of it, and the seller usually bakes it into the price of their house. So.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
So I don't pay directly for Colleen. Now the house is higher by 3% perhaps, because they have to pay.
Is it 3 or 6? Is it 3 per agent?
Three per agent. 3 sell,
okay.
3 buy. Yep, traditionally.
Yep.
There's now online sites that will do it for less, which is valuable. More so if you're selling though, because here's the thing: if I said, okay, I want to do this without a realtor, and I felt capable legally to understand everything that was happening, that would mean so when I'm out in the market looking, all of the houses are already priced with that 3% built in, right? It's already priced with that. And so I would have to say to them, well, I don't have a realtor. You have to lower your price by 3%. And they'll say, well, I'll just sell it to someone who has a realtor. Or like, they don't really care. I mean, it doesn't, there's no, I mean, they could, I mean, it would be a wash for them, but they don't really care if you have a realtor or you don't have a realtor, because they've baked that price in already.
So when you went to get a realtor and you went through this whole process, did you pay the realtor anything at all?
No.
Nothing. Wow. Okay.
No. I paid
I did not know about that.
I pay closing costs, and closing costs include, that would be the price of the realtors in general, but the realtor just takes 3% of the sales price. The closing costs are other things, so excuse me.
Wait. I blanked for a second. There are closing costs in addition to the sales price? What's going on?
Oh, yes. So,
okay, or are we getting there? I don't know.
The closing costs. The closing costs are thousands.
Well, let's not jump ahead.
No, that would be the next step. So the realtors take 3% of the actual house, the price of the house. The closing costs, and I'm actually I can actually look this up because they're interesting. But they include.
Yeah, your version of interesting and mine are wildly different.
So some of the biggest costs in closing, of course, are the actual down payment. So that's going to be the biggest bulk, and that can be 5% to 10 to 20%. But there are other things as well. So you have to pay for an appraisal of the house to make sure that it actually appraises for the value that you're buying it for.
What does that mean?
Because if you're buying the house and the house is actually worth less than what you're paying for it, then you aren't going to get a loan from the bank, because the bank uses the house as collateral in the loan, right?
Oof, all right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, we're going to have to talk about the whole, like, getting a mortgage and getting a loan from the bank thing.
That's a whole other piece.
That's next.
Then you have to pay for escrow, and this is another big piece. Escrow is essentially you paying in advance for all of your insurance for the entire year, and taxes for the entire year, because you always pay taxes and insurance before, in the day one, you paid up front for the whole year.
That's standard for housing?
That is standard for housing.
I had no idea. Okay.
So those would be the biggest the biggest pieces. There's also recording fees for the county and the city to actually kind of monitor and document the sale. That's a couple $100. And then you have the actual title fee and the title insurance. And essentially what this is you hire a company called a title company. And they're the ones who actually do the sale. They conduct the sale. That's where you go to actually sign the papers with the seller across the table. And they're the ones, through issuing title insurance, ensure that you have ownership of the actual home, right? They're the ones saying you own the house. And they do the research to make sure there are no other liens or what could be called kind of outstanding debt that whoever had it before you had to pay, and the house could be used as collateral. They make sure everything is clear. So they do the research for you, and then they issue your insurance and say you own this house outright and it belongs to you, and then they keep those documents. So you pay that as well.
So how much does this all come out to? Is that all of that?
All the closing costs can be
outside the down payment, that is.
I don't know. It could be upwards of 6% probably in closing costs. Yeah.
Without including the down payment.
Without including that. It could be 5% or so, 5-6%.
And it's percentage based? This isn't just standard
it usually is
based
percentage
on the
based.
house?
Yep, it's usually percentage based.
Wow. Oof. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
It's expensive. But
that's not including the real estate agent either.
Well, that's
right?
included
that
in the
price
price
has
of the
already been
house.
baked in.
That's baked into the price of the house.
Okay.
Because they take a percentage.
So not only is there the price for the real estate agents, which is baked into the house at roughly 6%, 3% per agent, there's also another 6% directly, roughly, for all of the closing fees. And that doesn't even include the down payment. Oh, man, that's a lot.
That's correct. Now, the funny thing is, you can negotiate for many things. So the two big areas of negotiation are either the closing costs or the actual price of the house. Usually you want to negotiate closing costs because those are direct costs to you. Yep. The price of the house is baked into your mortgage over a long period of time. So in my case, when you have the inspection of the house done, you hire an inspector. That's another cost, another $500-$600. They inspect the house. They say what's wrong, what's right with it. And then you use that to negotiate. And you say, well, look at all these things that are wrong. It's going to cost me X number of dollars to fix that. I want you to decrease the price of the house. And if it's a hot market, they'll say no. You either buy it or leave. If they want to sell, or if they're nice, they'll negotiate a little bit. And you can say, well, you can take a price off the selling of the cost of the house, or off the cost of off the closing costs. To the seller, it doesn't make a difference because they get that cash no matter what, right? They get that immediate influx of cash. But you want to negotiate those closing costs. So in my case, I actually negotiated the closing costs down by $5,000, which left me with actually very little closing costs.
Wait, how does that work? Does that mean that they're paying the closing costs, the seller would be paying it instead of you?
Correct.
Wow. Okay.
Yep.
I didn't realize that was an option.
So yeah, you can negotiate.
So what was that process like for you? How did that happen?
Well, that's another area where Colleen came in, my realtor. She did the negotiation. I said, Colleen, I want you to do this and this and this. And she said, okay. And she went and negotiated.
That's actually great, yeah.
And she was good. She was good at what she did, and she got everything I asked for. So, yeah, I learned that very quickly. That you want to have a very charismatic real estate agent.
That's tip number one. Charismatic real estate.
That's why they're all charismatic. That's why they all have the big smiley faces.
Yeah, I can imagine. Do you want to give a quick recap of the whole process there before we jump into other things?
Yeah, so the entire process is you realize you want to buy a house and you have to do the economic analysis. Does it make more sense than renting it versus buying? How much value are I going to get out of it personally to owning that house, etc.? And then you want to find a real estate agent. and then she shows you places, or he shows you places. You decide on the place you want. You submit the bid. Oftentimes the bid is not accepted, but when it is accepted, that's good. You have a certain amount of time to do the inspection. You can pull out at any point during this time as well. You can pull out, no costs, nothing to you, other than the cost of the inspection. There's a period at which you say, okay, I'm going to go ahead with this. Let's do it. You sign another billionth paper, and then you go into the negotiation period. You negotiate. You also negotiate the closing date. That is the date and when the title is transferred from the seller to the owner. That date is the day. On that very day, you go in and sign the documents. That is the day the title transfers. And then you own it, and you pay a bunch of money. And then it's yours. So that's the whole process in a very quick nutshell.
Huh. That is a lot. And the general recommendations are, for your first house, definitely get a realtor, because the price is going to be baked in for the price for the realtors are going to be baked into the price of the house anyway, and you might as well leverage some of the benefits like expertise around the papers and legal ramifications, as well as guidance and negotiation and emotional support, right?
I would say yes. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So you just bought a house. What's next?
So really quickly, Steve, I do want to mention the actual mortgage side of this very quickly, because that is
yes, we were going to talk about that, the whole going to the bank, getting the loan, all of that.
That's and very quickly, that is essentially the same kind of idea. You have to go find someone you like and want to work with, who will lend you that money. And you can go to a local bank. They may be more responsive to you, but generally the rates are going to be slightly better. Generally the rates are the same across the board. They're going to be slightly better from really large national organizations. So I did Quicken Loans. I got a mortgage broker. He was the one who did all of my financial reviews to make sure I actually have the money to afford what I wanted to afford. And they're key. They're absolutely key. They are involved. They're one of the key players, them and your real estate agent. That's sort of your team. And they talk to each other. Because, if the house you want to get is a little more expensive, then the realtor talks to your mortgage broker and says, hey, can Scott afford this more expensive house? He runs the numbers. He said, yes, he can. And then, it goes like that.
Also, should mention that this episode of the podcast is sponsored by Quicken Loans. No, I'm kidding.
They worked great, I will say, but we're not getting a kickback from Quicken
Giving
Loans.
them free sponsorship right
here. I'll take a couple $1,000s for that, but no. It is what it is. But yeah. So that's the mortgage side of it.
Okay, cool. And so now you've purchased the home, you've gotten your mortgage. What happens next?
Well,
at least for you.
So you have to start formulating your long-range plans, at least for me, and short-range plans. So I've relatively achieved my short-range plans, and that was make it livable, fix the things that were bothering me, and that's basically done by now. And I put...
How long did that take?
Huh?
How long did that take?
About 2-3 months. I did a lot of the work myself, but I did have to hire several folks to come in and do a little contract work to fix some structural things and fix some plumbing, etc. That was a couple $1,000. But once you spend so much money, it's like, what is another $1,000? Oh, whatever. Spend it.
I can hear the pain in your voice as you say that in your best attempt at some level of nonchalance.
Yeah, I know. It's a lot of money.
Do you want to mention if there's... I know that you were, over this whole process over the last few months, getting really into the actual renovation construction side of things. I know you didn't do anything super extreme, but maybe you want to mention a couple things that might be tips for anyone who's bought, let's say, a similar kind of starter home with a few areas of improvement that you might say, hey, here's some advice. Here are some things that you could do probably on your own without too much expertise.
Yeah, sure. So there's three big things I did. The floor was sloping a little bit. It's a 90-year-old home, so things start sloping and slanting, etc. The structure in the basement and the joists holding up the floor were not supported correctly at the main beam, so an additional support had to be put in. That was significant cost. That was about $4,000. I had to get plumbing put in for the washer and dryer. The dryer runs on gas, so I had to get a gas line put in there. That was expensive. And then I put a new roof on the garage because that was what was leaking. The garage was quite leaky. The main thing that you have to remember is you have to get more than 2 quotes. You have to get 3 or 4 quotes from contractors, and you can't feel bad about any one of them. The cost of doing the job varies so significantly by thousands of dollars, by 100%.
Wow.
100%. I had quotes on the roof in the garage come in at $2,500 and $5,000.
Is that based on the quality of the work, or is that based on how much they think that they can get out of you?
I have no idea, because everywhere I looked, I used Angie's List. You may have heard that advertised online. There's another one we're not.
I've never even heard of that.
But essentially, it's like Yelp, but
this podcast is sponsored by Angie's List.
That sounds like public radio because they say that a lot. But it's essentially like a paid subscription service where you can access reviews, and professional reviews, professional insight, and for people who actually have bought services from these people online. It's like Yelp, only much more rigorous, and much more rigorous. There's actually people who monitor it and kind of make sure there's no fake reviews or anything. Everything was rated 5 stars, and that's good. That's good. It's just, I don't know if it's the time of the year, how many people they have, what their leverage is with their suppliers. I don't know, but it varies significantly. So do get multiple bids. It can save you thousands and thousands of dollars. No, that's the biggest.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so let's move on to the things that you did yourself, right? Because you talked about where you hired contractors and a little bit around that, but are there areas of the house that you actually decided, hey, I'm going to do this myself and work on it?
Yeah, so I will do everything except I don't do plumbing, significant plumbing. I might do a little bit of plumbing. I won't do foundation work. So anything to do with the foundation, I won't do roofing. But everything else, every kind of painting job you can imagine, I'll do all painting. I don't hire anyone for painting. I painted all the kitchen cabinets. That could be a couple $1,000s to hire someone to do that.
Oh wow, that's pricey.
It is very expensive. I demoed the basement. The basement used to be half finished, but they didn't do it properly, so I had to take all of that out. So I demoed the entire basement. I did that. That was a big job. And then most of it is just little things that you wouldn't even think of that I did myself. Put new locks in all of the doors. I fixed some of the rotting wood in the garage. I took it out and put in new wood. I fixed some electrical stuff that was wonky. I, patched up areas of the house with concrete that needed additional concrete. I patched cracks. I patched areas that were leaking. I scraped and redid the handrails. There's a lot of little things that can make your house look really nice that you could hire out, and many people do, and it costs hundreds of dollars, but you can do it yourself. It takes time. You screw up. You mess up. Believe me, I've had to redo many things many times, but it's also a learning process, because you always make that one mistake, and you're like, okay, next time I do that, don't do that. And it is amazing how many little screw-ups, I'm going to say fuck-ups because they were fuck-ups, how many little fuck-ups you can make that are unique. Like, how many single, individual, unique fuck-ups? Like,
you know what? They add flavor to the house. So.
How many little screw-ups? I mean, how many it could exist in the universe? And none of them are duplicated. They're all like individual. Like, oh, I didn't know I should do it that way. I guess I know now.
You know what, though? This, I feel like, comes to a great point because, I fall into this trap a lot. As someone who's still a renter and overly idealistic about buying their first house and has never actually done any of the research. I'm learning a lot right now, actually. I'm just assuming, I'm going to buy this house and it's going to be of a certain quality that's at least as good as the places that I'm renting now, if not better. And it's going to be in a great location. I'm not going to really have to do any work on it. If there's any renovation, I can hire out. But really, it sounds like part of what you're saying is that first starter home, if you're making a sound financial decision around your investment in the house, is going to require work. It's going to require getting in, understanding what's wrong with the house, finding a place that does have some of these issues, but issues that are ultimately fixable if you can put in the work and grind on making it better.
Yeah, I could have moved in to this house and lived here just fine without doing anything to it. But when you own it, when you actually, it's yours, you start noticing the littlest things. It's like,
well, how does it feel to own a house now?
Well, I like feeling that it is mine. I can do anything I want in here and change it in any way I want and have no ramifications. And it's nice also when you start doing this renovation, you're always like, am I going to break something? I'm going to hurt the house? Because that's what you're like in an apartment. It's like, oh, I have to like be careful because I'll have a damage deposit. When at the house,
yep,
there's very little you can do to damage it permanently. Yeah, you might put a hole in the wall, but it's like, it's not a big issue. I mean, if you do it, it's your fault. It's your house. You own it. Cover it up and fix it later. You know, there's not that. I'm more protective of it. I'm more invested in it, but I'm also more willing to kind of take risks, do experiments, like try out different things, because it's not going to make the house fall down, and I don't owe anyone for it, right? I just owe myself for a stupid mistake. So it's nice, and that's why when you go visit people's houses, they're so like wonky sometimes, because like, I can do whatever I want in here, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But you're actually not going to change the physical properties of the house. It's not going to fall down. It's not going to move. It's not going to start leaking. The structure is sound, but the inside, it's kind of infinitely changeable.
Yeah. So I'm just going to crack open another one of these ridiculously sweet Christmas beers. Give me a sec.
I will say the best thing about owning a house is, actually there's many. One is walking around without caring about what type of clothing or clothing at all I am wearing.
I do that all the time and I rent.
And you have a roommate.
I have no shame. It's a real problem. I'm pretty sure my roommate is really pissed about it.
Do you walk around naked in front of him? No.
No, I definitely don't walk around naked.
Well, see, that's what I said. I can walk around naked into the kitchen to make coffee if I wanted to.
Yeah, but I could do that if I lived in a studio, and I used to. I don't think that's a unique thing about owning a home.
Okay, fine. I take that.
That's just a thing that you do all the time, Scott. I don't know what you're talking about.
That's true. Second, okay, the main thing is I can play music as loud as I want to.
That is great.
So loud.
Yeah. And you used to live in an apartment building, so it's a big switch for you there.
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, there's no one to tell you to turn it down, and that's really nice. That's really, really nice. And just privacy.
Oh, definitely. So I kind of want to turn this around to be a place where you can give me advice on what steps I can take to buy a home. So for the audience, in case we haven't discussed this, in case this is the first episode or the 5th episode or the 10th episode, who knows? I live in DC, and DC prices for housing are considerably higher than in the Twin Cities. And while I don't make a terrible salary, I do okay. I find it difficult to be able to accrue the kind of money I need for a down payment on a house in DC. So looking at the housing situation as it is now, and being ultimately very jealous of Scott and his swanky new house that he bought himself.
I would not call it swanky.
I would like to ask Scott for advice on what I can do as someone who's in their, currently late 20s, 27, looking to buy their first house and what he should do.
The question that my realtor asked me, and I think is the best question, is just why do you want it to do that? Because there's many reasons you don't want to do it. It's a shit ton of work, and it's a
What are what are the reasons to not
It's a lot of money. And if you're looking for a quick buck, buying a house is not the place to go.
Okay.
Because if you factor in the closing costs, if you factor in the fact that you're not going to gain any equity with a 30-year mortgage until you're like in year 10, because mostly you're paying interest for the first 10 years. If you factor in the fact that if you are living there, you're probably going to have to do some sort of renovation repairs because it's not going to be just how you like it. Well, sometimes that's not a one-for-one in the value of the house. Sometimes it doesn't increase the value of the house at all. So you can't do it for economical reasons. Now, if you want to go into real...
I thought people flip houses all the time.
Well, that's the second thing. Why do you want to buy it? Do you want to buy it to make a quick buck? Well, in that case, you're going to have a lot of capital or access to a lot of capital to go in and flip a house. But that's not what my end goal was. When I told her is I love the city and I want to live here, and maybe someday I'll rent it and move somewhere else, but I want it to be my home for 5 years or so. And so that's why I wanted to buy a home. And I think the first thing of advice is figure out why you want to buy it. Because if you want to buy it to make money, if you're not planning to flip it, like go in, live with sawdust for a year and then sell it, I would not recommend buying a home if you're planning to make money off of it quickly.
Okay, so say I am very uncertain about my future, and I'm not sure where I'll be in, say, 2 years, whether I'd be reaffirming my decision to stay here or move somewhere else. Would it be worth it for me to look into buying a home at that point, given that there's an opportunity to turn around and rent that home for, at least some portion, if not all of the mortgage? And I don't know how that particularly works, but...
Well, it depends on what you think you're going to be earning, because if you are going to be buying it, you're going to be paying a significant amount of down payment in DC. Now, that's going to impact your future ability to buy another place, because you're going to be decreasing your cash reserves now instead of saving that and earning interest for the future. Now, you could get rent to cover the mortgage, but you may not. And doing the math, you usually can, but you may not make enough to actually cover everything. You may not be able to make enough off rent to cover the insurance. You may not be able to make enough off rent because insurance for renters is expensive. You may not be able to make enough to cover significant damages that occur to the house due to the renters or other factors. So renting a single unit is not a way to make money. Landlords who rent one single unit don't make money. The way you become rich as a landlord is renting 100 different units, because each one doesn't have a massive gain, because there's a lot of cost that goes back into it, right? You have to pay for...
So it's an economy of scale.
It's an economy of scale. Renting and being a landlord is an economy of scale if you want to make it big. The reason you may want to buy is if you think, okay, someday I may want to come back to DC, and you would have somewhere to live because you could end the person's lease. But if you don't know about that, and you're not sure where you're going to be in 2 years, I think it'd probably not be a good idea to do it. And it's a huge distraction. It's a huge distraction.
How so?
my whole entire life has gone into this place, and it also depends on your general affect. I'm someone who really, I'm a romantic. I want to make it look nice and look good, and I want to make sure it's functioning properly, and I want to make it, pretty. No, you may not care what it looks like.
You want to invite people
over. You want to have friends over, and you want it to look nice.
Yeah.
That takes.
You need to have the housewarming party.
It takes a lot of time to get it to that stage, unless you're willing to pay a lot of money to contractors, right, to get it to that stage for you. So unless you want to do that, which sucks even more money out, you have to be putting in a lot of your own time, and that's a huge time suck. It really is. It's a big time suck.
So it really sounds like you have to be invested in settling down in that place, at least for a reasonable number of years, say half a decade or so. And that if you were planning on leaving in, say, 2 to 3 years, it might not be worth purchasing the property unless you see a future in which you would be coming back. So it wouldn't necessarily be economically feasible to expect that purchasing a property, staying in it a couple years, and then renting it out would be beneficial. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's what I would say. That's what I would say.
Because at least among people I've talked to, and honestly myself, I've always kind of assumed that that's an option, and that in a lot of ways the biggest limitation is the inability to accrue enough wealth for a down payment. But it really seems like there's a lot more depth and complication to it than that.
There is, and it's always an option. And I'm sure you'd be fine. I'm just saying you may not, if economics are your driver, I don't think you. I think it'd either be a wash, a very small gain for a lot of your time, or a loss. You aren't going to make big bucks by
there's the opportunity cost to that, right? There's the opportunity cost to what else could you have been doing with your time that could have, improved either your quality of life, hanging out with friends, being with family, or professional development, improving your skills. You could have been doing a lot of other things instead of working on that. And if real estate isn't something that you're truly passionate about, given the ROI, it might not be worth it to invest in a property that you ultimately expect in a very short amount of time to be renting out purely for profit.
Yeah, and to be honest, if you bought a place in DC and rented it out for 50 years, you'd turn a profit. But and I'm not saying
if I can buy a place in DC.
Well, right, but I'm saying it's worthwhile, but it's a long-term investment. It is a long-term investment. It's not like the stock market where you can bet and think, oh, maybe that stock's going to go up 20% this year. There's no real estate that's going to go 20% in 1 year. I mean, maybe in some extremely hot markets, maybe, but that's doubtful. Most real estate, 6-7% a year, maybe. It's not going to jump by some massive amount and make you billions of dollars like investing in a startup would or could. All right? It just doesn't do that. Real estate doesn't operate in that fashion. So, you will get money. It is advantageous to do it in the long run, very, very long run. That's great, or on a very big scale. Mm-hmm. But if you're just looking to do it for a couple of years, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. And maybe you do want to rent for a long time. You rent the place out for a really long time, but you have to recognize that buying the place, you have a lot of upfront costs. You'll decrease your purchasing capacity for other places that you may want to buy more so down the road. And so you have to figure that into the equation as well.
Okay. And do you have any sense of what the real estate market is like in the Twin Cities right now?
It's slowing down, actually. It's
falling down. Okay.
Yeah, it's actually a good time to buy. I bought at the start of the slowdown, which is good.
So not the best time.
Not at the best time. Not at the best time. But that's again, you have to. It's not just economics for some people. I was ready to buy a house. I was ready to have my own place. It's just.
And
nice.
Your lease was coming up
Yeah, and I say I don't want to do it for another year, and I didn't want to rent for another year, and so I get immense personal return from it, and so maybe I'm spending more money now than I would be renting, but it makes a lot of sense for me personally. I enjoy it a lot, just like I would.
Which at the end of the day, I think is unfortunately underweighted in a lot of these conversations, which is really frustrating because a lot of the conversation around real estate purchases is around real estate as investment vehicles. And the truth of the matter is, especially if you're younger and looking to buy your first place, that house is really a home that you want to feel like you can experience and live, right? And it's not necessarily 100% about what your ROI is going to be ultimately when your resellers start to rent that place. Yeah, so I'm glad that for you, Scott, this has worked out really well. And it sounds like you're pretty happy with the whole experience.
I have always loved the study of economics. I wish I was an economics major in undergraduate. The entire core of economics is about maximizing utility. And the most beautiful thing about economics is they don't define utility in monetary terms. It defines utility as the benefit to the consumer in any way that they see that benefit for themselves. And buying a home for me maximized my utility. It didn't maximize my financials in the short term, but it did maximize my utility because I was able to get a place that I could consider a home, I feel comfortable in, I feel secure in, I'm not moving, I don't have a lease, I'm never going to be kicked out, the rent's never going to go up, I have the same payments for 30 years, that's not going up, other than taxes. So that for me was the utility.
It actually might go down in terms of real wages, depending on inflation,
It will go down in terms of real wages, yes. That's true. So for me, yes, it makes financial sense in the long run, but immediately it maximizes my utility for well-being. And that makes economic sense.
Great. Well, I think that is a perfect place to end the podcast. So how far did you get in your wine?
Actually, not very far.
I was doing... I was mostly listening and trying to absorb as much information as possible. And with that comes a lot of drinking. So I was able to get through about 1.5 pints of this ridiculously sweet or soda blonde ale. Again, the brewery, if anyone listening wants to subject themselves to this, they should definitely give it a shot. It's a blonde ale with cinnamon and rice and lactose. Anyway, I think we're going to call it there. Thanks, Scott, for sharing your experience. It's been awesome hearing about this. I learned a lot, and to be honest, my takeaway from this conversation is that given my current circumstance, I probably shouldn't be looking at purchasing property in DC. This has been great. Thanks, Scott. Let's talk again next week.
Next week, Steve.
See ya.